So the next category of documentation we're going to look at is over-the-counter medications. Over-the-counter medications. And remember, the reason we want to pay attention to this is it shows the need for care. Remember, we talked earlier about that becomes even more important when they're taking over-the-counter medications if they did not go to the emergency room or doctor within 72 hours of the accident. But I want to pay a lot of attention to the over-the-counter medications for several reasons, and I'll share those with you now. Now, these are the 5 common areas that I'm going to be looking. Pain medication, anti-inflammation medication, anti-muscle spasm medication, anxiety medication, and sleep. Those are the 5 areas I'm going to focus with the typical neuromusculoskeletal, low impact, soft tissue spinal injury. Those are the 5 categories I'm going to be focusing on. If there's something else they're doing, I'm going to pay attention to it and have it documented. And remember, you always want the name, the amount, and the frequency. You always want that. Now, what are some of the potential reasons you would want that? And the reason I'm pointing this out is I remember when I got out of school, I didn't pay much attention to medications. They'll write down their medication. As a chiropractor, I'm not paying attention to that too much. I'm a chiropractor. No, this is why you need to pay attention to it. And it was a mistake that I didn't pay attention to it because I didn't know any better when I got into school. It's how it affects the healing. So relative to the personal injury, we're going to pay attention to it because how it's going to affect the healing and re-exacerbations. So the potential factors, it's a potential increase of an injury. In other words, a potential increase in injury. Well, what would be a reason? And this will come out in my narrative report. What would be a reason that these medications could potentially increase the injury? Well, this is very common. Patients start feeling better. They take the pain medication. As soon as they start taking the anti-inflammatory or the pain, whatever, right? What do? They start going back thinking they can do the full activity with those joints and muscles, and they can't. And then they routinely have setbacks. So I'm going to be paying attention to that's the reason I'm paying attention to the medications. One is that it just covers their pain, allows them to increase their activity for a re-exacerbation. That's going to be important. Number 2, is it going to decrease the healing? Remember, NSAIDs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, inhibit the synthesis of type 3 collagen in the healing process. So it naturally makes those tissues weaker, is what it does. If you're not aware of it, the big case of how all this happened was back in the early mid-70s with Dick Butkus, the football player, and they injected his knee with steroids. Well, they didn't tell him that steroids essentially dissolve the connective tissue in the cartilage. So he kept getting injections in his knee, and his knees just wore out to where it's like bone on bone. Well, later on, he found out that he learned that those steroid injections help essentially dissolve the cartilage tissue and propagated his problem. So his medical supervision and therapy propelled his problem, made it worse, and made him crippled, where he eventually had to have a double knee replacement. That was a major lawsuit. That was the first biggest case. He won $1 million. That was $1 million soft tissue injury case of medical malpractice. That's one of the reasons why when one of your patients goes and gets a steroid injection, that's why they'll only do it 3 times, because they know it damages the tissue each time they do it. So pay attention to decrease NSAIDs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatories. That's another like red light going off in my head. Are you taking NSAIDs? Especially during the repair phase of healing when the collagen is being synthesized. Okay. That's going to help create permanency and weakness. That's going to be in my narrative report, the notes. And of course, exacerbations, it helps with exacerbations because it covers up their problem. They think they can do more. The tissue's not healed, but they don't feel it. And now they re-injure themselves because it's not as strong. These are very common. I mean, if I had to put a percentage on it, I'd say 80% of the patients this applies to. This is how probable it is. And that's just from my experience of seeing hundreds and thousands of patients. So over-the-counter medication. Do we want to pay attention to it? Yeah, but we're paying attention to it for a different reason. Exacerbations, permanency, we're paying attention to it for a different reason. And then focus on the ones that deal with pain, anti-inflammation, anti-muscles, anxiety, and sleep. Get the name, amount, and frequency. And if they have any of those, they have NSAIDs, steroids, any of that, or re-exacerbation, and they've been taking some over-the-counter pain medication, some ibuprofen, Motrin, all that, I'm putting it in there. That's in the narrative report. That's going to be one of the factors for the re-exacerbation and causation, and that it's one of the causing factors that help inhibits the healing 100%. It's going in the narrative report.